Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. When I was around 22 years old, I had a scary encounter while staying at a hotel for a job. Around 2010, I was working for a traveling photography group that took church directory photos. Each photographer drove separately from all over the place, so I was in Harlan at that time. I was staying at a hotel along with other photographers who joined with me. I believe there was 4 of us, 2 guys, a girl, and myself. One morning, I went down to breakfast and I was watching the TV in the hotel breakfast area. Someone was also down there nearby, and it was a guy. When he looked at me and I said, "Good morning," as I do wherever I go, just to be friendly, he said it back and we had just a polite exchange. Something you would do with a stranger that you never thought you would see again. He mentioned that he was staying there with his team for a construction job, and I go to leave and I say something very casual like, "Have a good one, see you later." He said something like we could hang later. I didn't really think anything of it, and I just brushed it off like, yeah, maybe. I don't remember if it was the same day or not, but as I didn't work until 11 a.m., we tend to work from like 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., give or take depending on the size of the church and etc. I decided to go take a nap since I didn't sleep well the night before. While laying in my room, I kept receiving phone calls to my room phone. I wasn't used to getting calls like that ever, so I just picked up. I would say hello, but nobody would answer. After a few times, I eventually just took the receiver off and placed it beside the phone so that it would stop ringing. When it was time to get up and leave, I left my room and I saw the guy was there in the hall. I waved casually, still not thinking anything of it. He asked where I was going and I said that I had to go to work. And my friend showed up and I went with her to the car as I was going to ride with her to the church. I told her about getting strange phone calls and she mentioned that she did as well. Later that night, there was a thunderstorm. My photographer group and I stood by the hotel lobby door watching the lightning. It was thundering and extremely dark. There were chances for tornadoes, so we were keeping tabs with each other. Eventually, I just go to my room for the night and then I hear a knock on my door. I didn't really want to answer it. However, I did, cracking the door to see who it was. And it was the guy. He talked about how I said we could hang out, and I told him that I was too tired after working all day and I needed to sleep, and then I just shut the door. Now, I can't remember if this was the next morning or still night, but I recall him knocking again, but I wouldn't answer. I pretended to either be out or sleeping. I called my mom and I started talking to her. I told her what was happening, and although I was scared, I almost acted like I wasn't when I was speaking with her. But suddenly, I had a weird feeling. I whispered to my mom, "Mom, hold on a second, I need to check something." I tiptoe as quietly over to my room door as possible, and I look out the peephole, and I see him. I then see him turn his head to my door as if he was listening for something. My heart started to race, and I then saw him move to the side. You know how the wall sometimes goes in for the doors, so there is like an indentation in the hallway for each room. Well, he goes to the wall away from the room that's just out. I think he thought he was hiding because he would try to lean his head around the corner of the jut-out portion as if he was listening for something. I walked to the furthest side of my room quietly and whispered to my mom about how I am scared. I called the front desk to complain like my mom suggested, And I can't remember if I also texted my friend or I called her, but she also complained to the front desk about the various phone calls that she received. Eventually, we were given new rooms, and the construction group manager was told by the hotel about one of his guys, and that creepy guy was told to stay away from us. I even told some of the church people about the situation, and they all said that if we needed to stay with them, we could. All very nice, but still all strangers to me, and I didn't trust anyone at that point. I'm not sure what happened to him, as I didn't see him after that. I was a little jealous of my friend because she ended up with a hot tub in her room, and I didn't, but it was fine. However, after that, I was more aware and careful with who I talked to and what I said. So when I was 19, in my second year of university, I lived in a semi-small city, if you can even call it that really. Now, due to some other stuff that was ongoing at that time that I won't get into, I often went on walks by myself for my own well-being. I know a lone person should never walk by themselves at night, but again, it was a small city. So whilst I was on this walk, a male approached me. At first, he was just trying his luck, so to speak, asking for my phone number. But that is when he started becoming more and more aggressive, trying to force me to give him information, like where I lived, what times I walk alone, and how easily he could just follow me. At this point, I became really quite scared and essentially told him to go away and leave me alone. But this is when he tried to grab my phone and said, "You're coming with me." He then proceeded to grab both of my wrists and drag me away. I have never felt such panic, as he must have been a 6-foot-plus man of a large stature, so I was no match for his strength, being a 19-year-old girl who couldn't afford any type of nutritious meal. Anyway, by the grace of something, there was a pub nearby where people saw this happen and then came over to intervene. Thankfully, I got away. I took the long way home in order to prevent him from following me. So, I wish that I could say that that's where it ended. I didn't think that he had followed me or watched me, but he quite clearly had. In the weeks that followed, we had a black car parked outside our address at about 12 a.m. at night. The figure in the car was very concealed. Anyway, this person remained watching outside for hours. He would come out of the car occasionally and can only do what I would describe as lurking around our address. And no, we didn't call the police at this time. That was stupid. When I was not in, and thankfully none of my housemates were, our neighbors had to call the police as there was a man trying to enter our home, looking for any openings in the windows and trying our back and front door handles. Alarmingly, the said man was trying to enter my bedroom as I was on the ground floor. Anyway, one night we were all sat in the kitchen drinking cheap booze, as university students do, when the exact man that had approached me on the street those weeks ago jumped our back wall, which was very tall may I add, and then he ran into our garden and just stared through the window. This man had a look in his eye that I had never seen before, just pure evil. He wasn't even alarmed that he had been seen, nor was he even spooked. So, we called the police again and he finally got caught and arrested after trying to run off from them. Also, credit to the police here. They were there in literally 3 minutes, which may have helped that we live so close to a police station. Anyway, what happened sends chills down my spine to this day. This man had a knife on his person. What were his plans? What was he going to do? I will never know, and I am glad to never know. If there is a lesson here to anyone, do not walk the streets at night. And if you do, be with someone, even if you only live in a small area. These types of people are in every corner of our world. And that being said, let's never meet again. I, 7 female at that time, and my best friend, 8 female at that time, who I will refer to as A, used to have a day in the week, Wednesdays, when I went to A's house after school for about 4 hours. I would have dinner there, and then I would go home. A's mom, Australian, didn't have a job at that time, so when we walked to her house, she would be there when we arrived. But on this specific day, however, she was out. I can't remember why, because this was many years ago. There was this man. He used to watch the young girls at pickup time. He would just stand there, alone, with his creepy hoodie pulled over his head. My school had kids of all genders from ages 5 to 12, but he only ever watched the girls under 10. He was young too, maybe only 20. I never paid any attention to him. Maybe he's an older brother, and I just look a bit like his sister. On Wednesday, A and I got out of our class, and she reminded me that I forgot my drink bottle on my desk in the classroom. I went to go back in and get it. The huge swarm of kids had dwindled slightly by the time that I got back, but there was still a lot of kids, obviously. My school only had about 400 kids, but it felt like a lot. Not really relevant, sorry. There were less kids around, and the ones who got picked up by a car were mostly gone, and the ones that rode their bikes were long gone too. It was mostly just the kids who walked. A's house wasn't far. It took less than 10 minutes to get there, usually. But we used to get distracted by some of our other friends who we passed when we walked there. And for context, these friends were all our age and were all boys. A and I started walking home, and it was completely normal. Nothing seemed off. We crossed the first road and then started laughing as I jumped up on someone's brick wall and I started walking along it. Or I was, until the person who lived in the house started banging on their window. So I jumped down, embarrassed. A sort of waved her hand at me, beckoning me to be faster, so I jogged a bit, with my huge clunky backpack weighing me down, and I caught up to her. We crossed a very large road about 6 or 7 minutes after this, and it wasn't long until we were at A's house. We just turned a corner, walk a bit further, and then it was right there. We turned the corner, and we started walking the short distance. I turned around when I heard a car just to make sure that I wasn't walking too close to the road. And that's when I saw him, walking about 20 meters behind us, hood pulled over his head. Well, that's not too weird. He probably just also had to go this way, right? When I looked at him, he stopped walking, and he just stood in the middle of the footpath. I told A that I was a bit freaked out, and we started walking faster. We got to her house and thought that it was a little funny. He was still standing back where he'd stopped earlier, but he must have seen what house we went into. A's family made us take off our shoes and socks and leave them on the front porch. We did that, opened the door, and then went inside. Usually, we only shut the flywire, seeing as A's mom was there, but today we closed and locked the second door too, and I am so glad that we did. We decided to go play video games in the front room. The blind was down, and we were sitting on the couch. It must have been 15 or so minutes when there was a tiny knock on the door. We're smart kids. We knew not to open the door. A's mom would just unlock it and come inside if it was her. A decided to peek out the blinds though, and she said that it was some random guy. She thought that it might have been a salesman. I didn't bother looking. The knocking gradually got louder until he was pounding on the door like he wanted to break it down, and the door handle kept jiggling. We were insanely scared, and then we hid between the wall and the back of the couch. He then left after a little while. It wasn't too long. He got bored quickly, maybe 5 or 10 minutes of knocking. When A's mom got home, we didn't tell her. We didn't realize how serious it was. When it was time for me to go home and my mom had arrived, I went to put my shoes back on. But both mine and A's socks were gone, taken out of our shoes where we had tucked them. I never saw him again, or at least not following us. He might have still lurked around the school. I just don't remember. This was during my tenure in Japan, during my first teaching job. I was still learning the language, and I could only understand or speak a little bit. I also had an international driver's license at that time, having failed the local driving test multiple times before passing. I had used a whole month's paycheck to buy a small K car, I think a small box car, a Spiano Mazda to be precise. Every other day, I drove to this particular preschool where I taught the 3-year-old classes English. It was usually a very boring, uneventful drive and lasted 30 minutes. But this time, left me with PTSD. I was running a bit late, so I was driving a bit faster than I was supposed to be going. I didn't want my strict boss to yell at me. I was in the right lane, which was the fast lane. I rarely drove in that lane because I just enjoyed the scenery, but I didn't have time for that today. I noticed that my lane was disappearing, and I saw that there was a space in front of the car next to me, the psycho's car. So, I put my foot down, going even faster than I was supposed to, and I get in front of the car. I was a whole 2 car lengths in front of him, and except for the speeding aspect, I followed the rules of the road. That move to get in front of him apparently upset him so much that he followed my car for 20 minutes to my workplace. I didn't notice as I was trying to quietly urge people to go faster. As I pulled up, I noticed that my usual space was filled. I was rather upset at that time, but I would have been in a worse situation if I was in my usual position. The parking lot was actually just an abandoned gas station outside of the school. I parked my car and then get myself situated to get out, grabbing my purse, my phone, and mentally preparing myself for the next 3 hours. What I continued to not notice though is the man's car following me into the parking lot and then parking behind me. In all honesty, I am not proud of any of my decisions in the next 30 minutes of my life. He appears at my window, and as all the kids and their parents are arriving, I just presumed that he was a parent. I rolled down my window to see what he wanted, and I, a 24 female at that time, was just trying to be a professional teacher to this random father of my student. Unfortunately, he wasn't a father, but a deranged lunatic. He randomly started screaming at me in a language that I didn't understand in front of 2 to 4-year-olds and their parents. I only understood that he was angry about my car and that he was calling the police. I understood the word police. I obviously should have pretended not to have understood that word because now he was screaming at me about me being a liar and that I understood Japanese. Again, out of the words I learned from watching anime at that time, I learned police, Japanese, liar, and angry. So, That's literally all I understood from this very unhinged man, still screaming at me in a parking lot where toddlers were literally staring at him. He demanded that I followed him across the street and I agreed. For quite a few reasons. 1. I wanted to get him away from the kids ASAP. 2. The parking lot I was in was not going to give a quick getaway. The one across the street was an Aeon, so basically a big supermarket, aka an easier way to flee. And 3. I wanted the psycho to get back in his car. And 4. That's apparently where he sent the police to arrest me for trying to kill him, according to what I was told later. I drove to the Aeon and I kept my car running. He parked 2 rows ahead of me, glaring at me. For the next few minutes, I awkwardly just sit there. The police come, and he goes up to them demanding that they see the video. One goes to watch while the other comes to my car to get my version of the story and then verify my license. After getting the all clear, he asked what started the situation using Google Translate. I replied that I didn't know and that the other driver just randomly started yelling at me at my place of work. The officer walked away and spoke with his partner at the psycho's car. They talked with him, promising to deal with me. One officer asked if the psycho had assaulted me. Honestly, that possibility hadn't even occurred to me before that moment, that this very unhinged person could have started an altercation. I replied that no, he didn't, and I just wanted him to go away. Sorry, there was no way that I could have afforded a legal route on a teacher's salary. They walked back over to the psycho again and promised to get rid of him. I texted my boss the situation because now I was officially missing a class. The psycho then drives away, and then they come and stood protectively next to my car. After waiting 10 minutes, they said that I was free to go. There was no ticket, no fuss, no arrest on my part or the psycho's part. What the hell? Why did I have to deal with this situation for it to be just over so easily? I was still freaking out and I was not looking forward to the 30-minute drive home where the psycho was headed. I realized on my way home that I noticed when cars were behind me for a while. I also noticed that I was freaking out because they were heading in the same direction as me on the road with only a single lane per side for 5 minutes. Thanks to the psycho, I now freak out when someone literally drives back into town behind me. I couldn't shift the feeling of freaking out when someone drove behind me the whole time that I was living in Japan. I was able to increase the amount of time someone could drive behind me before freaking out though. Eventually, I would make a random turn somewhere, pull over, and just calm myself down. I still am wary when people follow behind me for longer than 10 minutes, but now I can differentiate between them just trying to get to work versus becoming round 2 of my nightmare. So, psycho guy with your deranged train of thoughts, please just stay in Japan and let's never meet again. There is this classmate, 22 and male, that I, 22 and female, have known for 2 years. We worked together in a few classes and studied in groups with others. We also follow each other on social media, but we never hung out one-on-one. A few days before graduation, he asked if I could help him with a class project. We met up at the library, and during our conversation, I casually mentioned that I had Tinder. He seemed surprised and asked if I actually met people from there. I said yes, and he kept emphasizing how surprised he was. After we left the library, he offered me a ride back to my dorm. I declined, and I said that I lived at the name of my dorm, which wasn't far away, and I just walked home. Shortly after I had reached home, I saw 2 missed calls from him. When I called back, he said that he had driven to my dorm's parking lot to hang out. Mind you, this person and me had never hung out outside of studying together, and I had never invited him to my dorm before, but he just decided to show up randomly unannounced. Still, I had known him for a couple of years, and I didn't want to cause any drama or deal with any gossip from people in our major, so I let him come up to my dorm. He sat in my chair at first, but then he moved to sit next to me on my bed where I was laying. He slowly started making physical contact, and eventually, some physical stuff happened. Afterwards, I asked him how many girls he's done this to, and he said 4 female friends, and he expressed his disappointment that usually afterwards they brushed him off when he tried texting them afterwards. He told me a few times that we were still friends and that I can still text him after we graduate. The whole thing left me feeling uneasy. I didn't give him any signals that I wanted to hook up, nor did he ask me if I wanted to prior to showing up. He just showed up uninvited after I mentioned having Tinder. I wasn't forced into anything, and I doubt I'll ever see him again. But I still find it creepy and overstepping of boundaries that a classmate that I have known for years would follow me home just because I said that I had Tinder. This happened like 6 to 7 years ago when I was working as a supervisor at an off license in a pretty small farming village in the middle of nowhere. It's a little past 10 p.m. our closing time, and my coworker B have finished up all of our jobs, packed everything that needed packing away. The alarm is set, and we're outside, and my key is in the motor to bring the shutter down. When all of a sudden, we both jump at the sound of a loud car engine revving to life. And not a second later, as the shutter meets the pavement, the offending car comes barreling around the corner and then pulls up abruptly about 15 feet away, conveniently pulling up in the blind spot of the store's prehistoric CCTV cameras. Now, I'm dense about cars, so I couldn't tell you what make or model it is, but it's nice. Maybe a Jeep or a Land Rover. That kind isn't uncommon in the area. As I said, we're a farm village, but normally you can tell when they belong to a farmer because they're kicked up in mud and dust. But this thing was new car level of shiny, pitch black with matching tinted windows. This is speculation because, as mentioned, I don't know anything about cars, but I'm sure the windows were tinted past legal levels because we couldn't see inside at all. The driver just sits there, engine still on, seemingly not going anywhere. As B and I chat between ourselves, both unconsciously stalling, waiting for whoever this is to move along. But we seem to be in a stalemate because nobody moves for at least 5 minutes. B's older than me. I went to school with her kids, and I can tell mom mode is activated by the way that she's eyeing the car and how she offers to drive me home. She's parked further up the road, so we wouldn't have to pass the stranger's car to get to it. I live with my parents at the other end of the road, about a 2 to 3 minute walk, but I would have to pass the stranger to get there. Even though my nerves are on edge, I'm not ready to assume the worst, and I don't want to put her out as she lives in a different direction, so I just decline. Yeah, I know. I die first in a horror movie. I'm content to just cross to the pavement on the other side to put a little distance between us, and then I could leg it if I needed to. But just as I approach the edge of the pavement to start crossing, some guy jumps out from the back seat on the side facing where I was about to cross to, leaving the door open. He's not masked or wearing dark clothes or anything to that effect. but he's wearing a cap and keeping his head down, so I can't really make out his facial features. And from what I can see, he's white, easily 6 foot, and I wouldn't say big, but fit enough that they could take B or myself, who are both closer to 5 foot and certainly not in the best shape of our respective lives. Immediately, I start backing up even more unnerved, as if sensing my suspicion. He lights up a cigarette, acting nonchalant, but at the same time, starts rounding the back of the car, joining B and I back on our side of the road, but for maybe 10 feet of distance. Actually, if the offer still stands, I would love a lift home, I say to B, and I can tell that she's relieved by my change of heart. We speed walk to her car, neither of us taking our eyes off the other vehicle and its passenger for more than a second. And as soon as we are seated in her dinky little 2-door, I pull out my phone, planning on taking a photo of their license plate. B has a similar thought and she's rummaging in her glove box for a notepad. But before either of us manage to execute our plans, the guy who had gotten out climbs back into the back seat and the car speeds off into the night, leaving a half-smoked cigarette in its wake. Typing this up actually makes the whole thing feel even more trivial than it did in my head. But in the moment, it all felt very distressing. The theory that wins out on most retellings is that they were there to rob the shop. B and I would have been easy to overpower, and presumably, there was at least one other person in the car to aid in that. They could have just taken the keys from me, or they could have forced us to go in with them so I could turn off the alarm system and open the safes. A few months later, I had moved to and was working a different job in the city, but I heard through the grapevine that the shop had been held up at knife point. I have no idea if it was the same people, but timeline-wise, it seems possible. The scariest theory goes to my mother though, who watches a lot of true crime and is certain that she could have been a police detective if not for a criminal record. She's convinced that it was a planned kidnapping, specifically for me. Her evidence being, first, the lack of proper face coverings and the fact that they were parked in the camera's blind spots. There were more cameras in the building that they couldn't have avoided if they wanted to go in and rob the place. Next, the fact that they seemed to have waited for us to fully leave the building. If they wanted to rob us, it would have been easier to ambush us as we unlocked the door to leave, rather than having us reopen everything. Third, the car's back door being left open would have made it easier for them to force me inside as I walked by it. And lastly, I always take the same short route to and from work for convenience. But why someone would have wanted to kidnap me specifically is a mystery, but I can see the logic in her arguments, I guess. I was already working on my notice period, but she made my stepdad drive me to and from work for all my remaining open and closing shifts. The theory that helps me sleep at night, though, is that it was all a coincidence. I can't explain away all of the little things that seem like red flags at that time, but I can 100% believe that the owner of a seemingly very nice car didn't want his mate smoking in it. So, he pulled up, argued with the guy for a few minutes about the situation, and eventually convinced him to get out to smoke his half of a cigarette. Maybe they'd legitimately wanted to come in and buy something, and were talking out the alternative options after pulling up and realizing that we were closed. Whatever the motive or intention, B and I were thoroughly spooked. And I still think about what might have happened if I'd walked home instead of taking B up on her offer. This started about 6 months ago. I was getting ready for bed in my room. It was maybe 10:30 p.m., My curtains were closed, so I couldn't see out the window. But I heard 3 hard knocks on the glass of my window. Of course, that scared the living shit out of me, so I didn't even look and I ran and got my dad and I made him look. Now, I live with my parents and 2 brothers in a fairly busy neighborhood, so noises weren't uncommon to hear. But this knock was directly on my window, so someone wanted me to hear it. The thing was, my bedroom isn't facing the front of the house or the road or anything. My room's actually toward the back of the house, so someone would have had to walk to the backyard in order to knock on my window, which seemed very odd, and I had my dad check, but when he opened the curtains, no one was outside the window. He even went in the backyard to check, but no one was there. That was the first incident, and I closed my curtains and brushed it off as just me hearing things or some sort of animal. The following night at almost the exact same time, I heard another 3 knocks on my window. Immediately, I went and got my dad again for him to just see nothing all over again. But this time, I didn't brush it off. I slept in my parents' room on the floor. The next few nights, there was nothing. Until about a week later. I was home alone and it was about 8:30 to 9 p.m. and I was on FaceTime with my friend when I heard another 3 knocks on my window. This time, I was home alone so I couldn't go and get my dad, but I ran into their room and I called them and they told me to call the neighbors to check because they were out of town, and so I did. But the neighbors also saw nothing. The night after that, it was about 1 a.m. I think, and I heard the knocking again. It wasn't 3 times though, it was more, and it woke me out of a dead sleep. I was tempted to just look out the window to see who, but part of me didn't want to know. I went and I got my parents who didn't bother to check at this point because they didn't see anything the last few times. I kept hearing the knocking for the next few nights after, to the point where I ended up just sleeping on the couch. My parents decided to just let me move bedrooms, and so they moved my bedroom into what was the office, and then they switched everything around, so I hopefully wouldn't hear any more things. After moving bedrooms, I didn't hear anything. It was good for maybe 3 nights, but then I heard it again, the same knocking 3 hard times. This time, I looked out the window. I saw what I assumed was a man or a very big-built woman crouching down wearing a gray hoodie and some dark jeans that I can't recall the color. It was dark, maybe gray or black, and I closed the curtains, went and got my parents, told them all about it, and they informed the police. The police really couldn't do anything because we had no solid proof beside my words. They advised that we get a camera facing my bedroom and around that area of the house. So that's what we did. I haven't heard the knocking since, but I do wonder who it was. And nonetheless, it makes a good story to tell. Recently, I went into a local grocery store at around 5 p.m. with my 2-year-old child. I was carrying my child since I was just going in quickly to grab some frozen chicken. As I was walking in, I noticed an older middle-aged woman pushing a grocery cart out the door as I was coming in. There was what I assumed a teenager in the grocery cart who was wearing a hoodie and had his head down. There was another young adult or older teenager walking beside the woman. The store was fairly busy during that time, but I'm naturally a pretty observant person, and it really paid off in this circumstance. As I was going into the first freezer section, I looked at the end of the aisle, and I noticed the older teenager who had been walking with the lady pushing the cart. He was looking at me, and I thought, well, that's weird. I just walked past them as they were leaving. Why is he back inside? What I was looking for wasn't in the aisle that I was in, so I went 2 aisles down, and there again was the older teenager standing at the end of that aisle. He wasn't shopping, but just standing there looking at me. I made eye contact with the guy, and my gut just knew that something wasn't right. My heart started to beat out of my chest, and I started thinking how I was going to handle the situation. I grabbed what I came into the store for, still carrying my 2-year-old because there was no way that I was putting her down to walk. I go up to the self-checkout, and right at the front was the guy again watching me. I was like, okay, there is no way that I'm leaving the store for him to just follow me to my car. I walked past him to the front desk area to speak to a manager, but it was just the bookkeeper. I told him that someone had been following me, and I turned around, and there in the second checkout lane to the right was the woman and the teenager in the grocery cart, still with his hood on and head down. The guy that had been following me is there with them now, tapping on the guy's shoulder in the grocery cart and literally saying, "We need to go now, we need to go." I was about 6 feet away and I could hear him say it. I point them out directly and say, "He's the one who has been following me." And at that moment, the manager had made his way up to the front, and I repeated what I said to the bookkeeper. The lady and the 2 guys were about ready to be done in the checkout lane. And the manager says, "I've actually been watching them for the last hour because I felt like they were up to no good." And he ended up walking me out to my car. I called the cops just to make them aware. The cops seemed like he took me seriously and asked what I thought those people's intentions were. I said, "Naturally, I thought they would try and take my baby if I had gone to my car." I'm not a big person. I'm on the shorter side, so I know that I would have had to put up one heck of a fight if they had tried anything. But to hell, if they had, I would have given them a fight for their life if they had tried to take my baby. But the whole thing had me shook for days. I thought that I would vent and share my story and hopefully bring some awareness to these sort of situations. So, this happened to me, a 27-year-old female, about 6 years ago. At that time, I was working in a bar, so I got off work pretty late, usually around 3 a.m. Since I lived quite close to the bar, I would always walk home after my shift. There were 2 different routes that I could take. One was along the street where most of the city's bars and clubs were, and it was usually really crowded. But since I was exhausted and I didn't want to see any more people that night, I took the other route, which was much quieter but also darker, and I never felt very safe there at night. As I was walking, a group of drunk guys approached me, blocking my way. I made it clear that I had no interest in talking to them, so they eventually let me pass. A nearby taxi driver must have seen what happened because he rolled down his window and asked if I needed a ride home. I declined, saying that I didn't have far to go, but he insisted, saying that he wouldn't charge me. I thought maybe he was just looking out for me since he had seen the incident with the drunk guys. So I made the really stupid decision to accept his offer. After I got in, he asked for my address and then we started driving. I even offered to pay him, but he refused. And shortly after, we arrived near my home. But instead of stopping, he drove past it. I asked where he was going, and he acted like it was an accident, saying that he was just looking for a place to turn around. But then he kept driving for a few more minutes until we ended up in an industrial area where he pulled into a dead end. At this point, I was terrified, but I didn't know what to do, especially since my phone had died earlier. I just said, "Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to turn around." He looked at me, and I think he got scared to follow through with whatever he had planned. And after a moment, he simply said that I was right, turned the car around, and then drove me back to my place. My heart was pounding as I got out of the car, but I was really grateful that nothing terrible happened that night. I know it was incredibly stupid to get into the car in the first place, and I still don't fully understand why I made that decision, but I think I just got lucky in the end. So, I know many of the Redditors here might have never been to Brazil or know of the happenings in Brazil. As a rule of thumb, you stay alert in Brazil when you're walking around. In major cities like Rio, Sao Paulo, you remain on high alert and you use common sense. Don't flash your fancy watch or your fancy phone. Don't wear some blingy chain around your neck. Don't wear a fat diamond engagement ring while walking down the street, and many more. Now, there are parts of the city that are quite safe and you will have zero issues. But there are some parts where you use common sense, and of course, every city in the world has sketchy places you avoid unless you want to end up raped, robbed, or worse. I have been living in Brazil for 7 years. I moved here with my wife, who is Brazilian. On a Thursday evening, we went to our local mall. It's not a very famous one. You won't find a Chanel or Gucci in this mall, but you will find some decent brands like Adidas and what have you. We opt to park in the highest level of the parking tower, as it's open and well slightly more spacious as we have a bigger SUV. We enter the mall to run some errands, pick up our dry cleaning, grab some food, and hit the stationery store. We realize quickly that we seem to be followed by a boy in his early 20s or maybe in his late teens. In fact, it looked like he had on a school uniform under his hoodie, and he had a backpack on too. My first language is English, so I speak English with my wife. She is also a native English speaker regardless of being Brazilian herself. This does draw attention to us, as almost no one here speaks English, unless it's working professionals in some financial districts in the city, and even that is seldom. We realize that we are being followed by this kid, but we think we are being quite paranoid. Maybe we made it apparent that we were onto him, or that we might have caught wind. But we enter the chocolate store to wait it out and see if he waits or passes on. He seemed to go away, so we just figured that we were being paranoid. We proceed to the open area top-level parking, and as I approach and click unlock on the key fob getting closer to the car, I notice one taillight has a strange orange glow instead of the regular red hue. We reach the car, and I notice many pieces of my broken taillights on the floor. Within a second of reaching our car and taking in what happened, another car pulls up next to us and then honks at us. I look at the windshield and notice that it's our vet and her husband. They smile at us and come out and say hi to us. We tell them, "Well, look, someone hit our car." And then how terrible it is. My vet's husband and I inspect the car and notice the taillights were broken deliberately, as no other part of the car was damaged, so there was no way that another car hit our car and just went about their way. No, this was a person purposely just breaking our taillights. Or maybe a motorbike? Confused, we just go back inside the mall, seek out security, and then head to the security office. The mall has insurance, so they said that they would proceed to start the paperwork on getting our lights fixed. They also looked up the video, and in the multiple cameras, you can clearly see that the guy who we thought was following us was accompanied by someone else and hurrying around the corner towards us as my wife and I approached our car. But they stopped as my vet and her husband got out of the car and started talking to us. You could see them in the camera just calmly turn around and walk away, all whilst constantly looking back. Security proceeds to alert all the guards and call the police and start a search for the young sleuths. The security then told us that a few malls and banks have been hit by thieves who will break your taillights just to distract you into standing and staying outside of your car as they run up behind you and then usher you into your car at gunpoint and then order you to go to the nearest ATM and clean your accounts out, or even worse. It was ridiculous luck that at that exact moment, our vet just happened to pull up right next to our car. A minute earlier or later, and I believe we would have been kidnapped. I am never going back to that mall, or at least never parking away from any of the mall entrances, and we have decided to speak in Portuguese and keep our English to a minimum when we are out and about to draw less attention to ourselves. Hey, let's not meet. I came across this community just today, and I remembered something that happened to me and two of my friends almost 20 years ago, so the memories are a little blurry. The three of us were at the ripe age of 5 and 6, and we were already pretty good friends since our older sisters went to the same class. So, we were pretty excited to join in on their school's field trip to Transylvania for a couple of days. We visited numerous museums and other cultural and historical sites. On one of those days, we visited the ruins of a historical castle, which was beside a village on a smaller mountain, surrounded by forest and roads leading to bigger towns. Ruins like this are all over Transylvania, so it didn't have much infrastructure except for a parking lot and the roads connected to it. After the mandatory inspection of the ruin, the teachers allowed the class and us three bozos to have an hour of free time for playing, on the note that we do not go too far. So, we played hide and seek with the older kids of my sister's class. Both my friends and myself had a beef with our older sisters, and we thought that this would be an opportunity like no other to show them who the superior beings are in our families. So, when it was our time to hide, we came up with a plan to ignore our teacher's words and then hide somewhere that they would never find us. We started to run towards the ruins of the castle and hid at the parking lot behind it. It was a little further away than we were allowed to go from the place where our teachers and my sister's class was, and definitely out of sight. Our plan was to scare the shit out of our sisters and only come out victoriously when they had multiple panic attacks. There were only a handful of cars and only a person or two except for us. The game started a while ago, and we were hiding behind a car when an older man around 40 approached us. He had a mustache and a beer belly and was around 5'7" tall. It was obvious that he listened to us talk and giggle about what a great hiding spot we found. And with a smile, he suggested that we should hide in the back of his car and pointed at an old and rather trashy car. Now, this is the moment where any kid with a basic set of survival instincts would run back to the teachers and tell them everything. But not me and one of my friends. The guy even suggested that he would cover us with a couple of blankets once we hide in the back seat. I was so excited about beating my sister in a silly little game that I didn't even realize how creepy that sounds. So, I said okay with a mentioned similarly excited friend of mine. Luckily for us though, the third kid in our friend group still had his sanity, so he politely refused and suggested that we should go back to the teachers. The guy tried to convince us a couple of times, but I guess he didn't want to risk being more aggressive with the whole class and teachers in the nearby area. So, we left and walked back to the others, disappointed and confused why our friend was such a buzzkill. We didn't talk about what happened to our teachers nor to anyone after because despite how weird it was, we couldn't tell for sure if the stranger was actually a bad guy. Looking back, it was definitely a bad call, but we weren't the sharpest tools in the shed at that time. I'm not entirely sure if the guy really wanted to do something horrible to us or if he was just being friendly. But looking back, it was definitely creepy. Long story short, don't get into strangers' cars no matter how much it would piss off your sister. And to the stranger who wanted 3 kids in the back seat of his car, let's never meet again. So this happened when I was young, maybe early 2000s. I had to have been 5 or 6, and I was born in California and had lived there for about 11 years before moving across the country. My mom and dad are separated, so I'm used to visiting my dad every weekend. We lived in a small apartment about a 10-minute walk from a small convenience store/gas station and literally across the street from a Barnes & Noble that my mom worked at. My dad was lonely, but also a bit insufferable, which I realized later. So occasionally, there would be a new woman over. He would introduce us to each other, and I would go back to watching cartoons. One day, he brought home another woman, again introducing us. She said her name was Lori. I never had a second thought about her. She didn't look familiar, and the name wasn't familiar either. I just continued to watch my cartoons. My dad said that he needed to grab cigarettes or something from the convenience store around the corner and that he would be right back. And not wanting to leave me alone, he asked Lori to watch me for a minute. But as soon as he left and was out of sight, I think Lori said that we should go walk to the bookstore or just go for a walk. Again, I can't remember it exactly. I just remember holding her hand and walking across the street to the Barnes & Noble. We went inside and I looked at the people at the checkout to see if my mom was there. She wasn't, but I just shrugged it off. We got to about halfway through the store when I heard a familiar voice call my name. It was my mom's friend and coworker Lucy. We would often go to her house and I would play video games with her 2 sons. I was immediately excited to see her and I just yelled her name. She said, "Hey, come here for a minute." And I ran up and gave her a hug. At that point, she started walking me somewhere else. I think she had asked if I wanted a lollipop or something and walked me to the employees only office in the back. I hadn't even realized that Lori had left. Lucy had said something into the radio and told me to wait in the office. I now realized that she had called security. Apparently, I was basically being kidnapped and I just had no idea. I found out later in life that Lori's children were taken from her because she wasn't fit to take care of them, and that she also worked at that Barnes& and Noble and then was fired. So, my mom and Lucy knew all about how crazy she was. Lucy had called my mom and then told her what happened. She immediately came to pick me up and then drove me back to my dad's apartment to chew him out. I can't remember if my mom took me back with her or left me with my dad after that, but I still went to visit him every weekend after. I don't know if Lori was found and arrested or what would have happened if Lucy hadn't been working that day or if she never even saw me. I'm just so glad that she did. So, to crazy Lori, who somehow enticed my dad and then tried to kidnap me, I doubt that we'll ever run into each other again, but even so, let's never meet again. I, a 25-year-old female, live in Seattle, and yesterday I stopped at a gas station in the late afternoon. This station had two sets of pumps, one by the storefront on the main road and another parallel to the cross street, a bit further away. I parked at the pump in front of the store, and there were no other cars or people around except for a van that parked at the other set of pumps. As soon as I parked, I saw a woman walking from the van and towards the store. It was a rainy, gloomy day and she was in a floral dress that looked very cutesy Christian cottage woman. Well, hopefully, that paints the picture. She looked slightly confused and was subtly looking in the window of my car before she approached me after I opened my door. She was seemingly distressed and told me that she had no gas, was stranded, and had to drive 30 miles to get home. I had an unsettling feeling about the interaction, and I told her that I was broke and that I didn't have 30 miles of gas money to help her. She then said that she didn't want money, but she needed me to come over to her car to help her. She kept repeating that I just needed to come to her car. I looked towards the van, and I noticed the rear window completely covered with black tape, and the car looked noticeably disheveled. I knew at that point that I would be going nowhere near her car or getting out of mine at all. After refusing her multiple times, she walks back to the van. It was one of those with the sliding rear doors, and when she returned, she slid it open slightly, and I could see that she spoke to someone in the back seat. At this point, a Mercedes pulls up at the pump right across from her, and then a man gets out. She does not approach him at all, and then just drives off. I know this isn't the craziest encounter. In the moment it felt off, but it wasn't until a few minutes after that the details sunk in and I realized what it could have been. Maybe I'm being dramatic, and perhaps it was nothing at all, but I do have good intuition, and something didn't feel right from the start. I'm a female, and I was 9 years old when this happened. My parents used to work as night market vendors. They were selling shoes back then. My mom did warn me to stay cautious and not wander off too far, especially at night. I did listen, as I have always felt anxious as a kid. I always have this feeling where I am in constant danger. One night, I was playing beside my parents' van. My parents were attending the customers, so they had no attention on me. As I was playing, acting as if I'm a Pokemon trainer, I saw a glimpse of a man. The man was tall and skinny. He was hiding behind an abandoned burger stall just a few meters away from me. I kept myself on high alert while I played, and the man slowly emerged from the shadow and showed me 1 ringgit on his hand. For those who do not know, that is Malaysian currency, by the way. He beckoned his hand, inviting me to come closer. I knew it from the start that this is the same thing that my mom had always warned me about. Man in the shadows, luring kids to come closer. It all made sense to me. So I backed away, trying to keep myself closer to the light and in the eye of the crowd. But the man crept in closer, raising his hand for me to see the cash at hand. He then put the money on the table and then stepped away. It's clear that he wanted me to come and get it. I felt super unsafe, so I turned around and played quietly, literally in front of my parents. I picked up a hammer and I gently swished it around, thinking that the man would think I'm dangerous. I thought that I was safe, but the man was persistent. He blended in with the crowds, now with much bigger cash in his hand. He stood far, a strategic spot where he could run away without being seen. That's when I had enough, and I felt 100% creeped out. I came to my mom and I told her that I didn't feel well at all. So she asked me to stay in our van if that's the case, so I got in. I kept looking through the window for a whole minute, and the man was nowhere to be found, so I thought that he was gone. With a sigh of relief, I lay in my van telling myself that I should just go to sleep. That's when I see a head with a familiar haircut walking in front of the van window to the other door, a door that I know is unlocked. I immediately got out of the van and ran to my mom, and I told her that there was a man with money telling me to come closer. My mom asked me to show my dad where the man with the money is. My dad followed me, but the man had disappeared, leaving the same one ringgit on top of the same table. I point the money to my dad, and he approached the table and took the money and gave it to me, and then he told me to stay inside. That was the last time that I saw the man. It always made me question how many other victims he had. Has he been caught? Or is he in jail? I'm male and 30. I was walking back home at night, kind of depressed because a loved one just died. The street I walk home to is almost always empty, with a few cars or motorbikes, and it's quite long too. It's a romantic street where I can enjoy my own thoughts. As I walk towards a big intersection on that street, a Renault or Peugeot, I'd say, wanted to turn the corner on that intersection. It's one of those cars or small vans that people who sell stuff use, since it has quite a spacious back, and you can even bend the back seats to add to that space. So I naturally stop for him to go ahead and turn. But the guy stops right in front of me in the middle of the turn, so my immediate thought was, Does this guy want to ask for some directions or something? But the dude does nothing. I can't see him well at night, but I can tell that he's facing me holding the wheel. After a small bit of time, about 5 seconds I would say, I start having doubts, since this dude doesn't ask for anything, doesn't lower the window, nothing. So I immediately start retreating, as if going back from the direction that I came from. Instantly, the guy reverses and turns back, as if tracking my movement and wanting to go to the direction that I would walk away from. After seeing that, I immediately switch back to going to the front side, and this man does the same thing. And to my horror, his back left side door is open. And here, I start to hard panic. After looking back, I see another car coming down the street behind me. My brain is hard panicking here. Is this one of his friends? Is my first reflex. But thank God that it's a normal human being that is also trying to turn the same corner. I assume that he saw the part where I'm staring at the luggage van going back and forth. I also assume that I look scared or paranoid to him too. So he simply cuts in front of this bastard and yells something to me. But I honestly didn't hear him. but I used his turn to also take some distance from this man, and I had the idea to call the police. But before the call is even dialed, I start acting completely safe and calm while talking to the phone and pointing with my hands as if I'm trying to figure out how to tell them the exact location. This bastard starts backing off the turn back to the original direction that he was facing before trying to turn. And then he runs straight ahead with his back left door open. The other car, however, that cut in front of him just drove off normally without stopping after or anything. After that bastard drove off, I stopped the police call and I simply walked back home from the more safe path. While walking back home, I started having doubts that maybe he really was trying to ask me for something, but the fact that he didn't lower the window and had an open back left door led me to think that he might try to spray me with some shit if I try to go close to the window. P.S. I stopped the police call because my family is on a visit for the dead loved one that I mentioned, and I don't want to worry them with extra crap on the side. I have so many encounters that I could write about. I seem to be a magnet for weird or creepy happenings. This occurred when I was around 19 or 20. And my life was a mess to say the least, and I was under a lot of pressure. But one of my favorite things to do was go to a used bookstore that I have gone to since I was little. You can exchange books for store credit, so I hadn't had to really pay for a book in years. This bookstore was in a strip mall, and there was a 7-Eleven where I would often get myself a soda and sometimes cigarettes. The people at the bookstore didn't care if I had a drink in there. The men there at the 7-Eleven, who were probably in their 40s, were checking me out and making some comments. When I bought my cigarettes and the cashier saw that I was over 18, he said, "Wow, you're 20? I thought you were so much younger. Doesn't she look younger?" And the other men working there agreed. It seemed like such an odd thing to say. I wanted to sit at the Starbucks across the street, but there was no seating, so I just lit my cigarette at the 7-Eleven, and it turned out that the cashier decided to take his break and smoke at the same time. I tried to be casual and not seem creeped out, but my guard was up, so I wandered over to the store to stay away from whatever they were doing. I was in the bookstore for a while. Then, somehow, I lost track of where I parked. I swear, I could lose my car anywhere. I was wandering around the parking lot, and I stepped between two trucks. Randomly, the 7-Eleven worker stepped in front of me, saying that I had to come back in. I told him in a pretty dismissive way that I had work, and I stepped forward. He repositioned himself so I couldn't pass him without spilling my drink and walking under his arm. He claimed that the cashier really needed my number. He claimed that at 5 p.m. they were going to a party and that I could come to the back of the store and drink until they left. It was around 4:30 at that time, I think. I told him that I had to work, and again, I tried to move around him. He had taken a few steps forward, so I had less room, but I am small and I tried backing up to go in between the other cars. After a couple of minutes of this, I decided to go inside the store because at least it had cameras. I saw two cops walking out as the employee led me in. I wanted to stop them, but they were moving too fast for me to try and grab onto one or something. In hindsight, I could have just yelled something, but I didn't think of it at that time. I also have notoriously bad luck with cops, so that didn't feel like the safest option either. When I came back in, they had already selected a mini bottle of liquor for me. The cashier was explaining how this party on a Wednesday at 5 p.m. was going to be awesome, and there would be substances and alcohol, and I was going to have so much fun. I kind of, uh-huh, and oh yeah, through that conversation because I knew that there was no party. And finally, the cashier got around to what he wanted, which was demanding my number. The other employee moved to the door and the cashier was hounding me for my number. I decided that the best route was to use a number with a 555 in the middle because apparently those are used for Hollywood phone numbers. They tried to get me to the back, but I said that I had to work and that I would go to the next party with them. I was trying to placate them but still get out. Also, somehow, no one else was in this 7-Eleven and I was fending off two creeps with nothing but a soda and a bag of books. I finally appeased them and I exited, but I knew that they would be watching me. I knew that I couldn't walk to my car and then go off do my nanny job because I didn't want them to see my car. I walked as calmly as I could to another store and frantically called the dad of the kids that I was going to watch. At this point, I broke down and I was shaking and crying. His wife was at work, so he was really my only hope to get out of there quickly. He pulled up in front of the store and then I jumped inside. I caught a glimpse of one of them looking out the window, but I don't think that they saw me. It wasn't until late that night that we went and picked up my car. My friends have different ideas of what they wanted, whether it was trafficking, kidnapping, or just holding me in the gas station. I still don't know. But whatever it was, they definitely didn't have good intentions. Looking back, I can laugh a little because as soon as the dad came, I noticed a hammer in his car and I asked if he planned on attacking them. And just for him to say, "Well, you never know when you might need a hammer." Years ago, when iPhones and Ubers weren't a common thing, I almost got abducted. I was a 21-year-old girl living in Austin, Texas. I had just graduated and I had no real clue what I was going to do with my life. I didn't want a corporate job like my classmates. I wanted to live and make art for a while. I had visited SXSW while at university in New York, and I fell in love with the wildness of Texas. It felt like the opposite of the life that I had been living in NYC, so I moved to Austin to take a break and recharge. I didn't have a car, but I still wanted to explore. I walked and took the bus everywhere. I barely knew anyone, maybe a handful of people at most. One day, while heading home after exploring the city, it started pouring. Not just rain, but a full-on Texas downpour. I figured that it would stop, and home wasn't far, so I just kept walking. But it got worse. I stepped in a hole and I twisted my ankle. When I reached for my phone, I realized that it was dead. Fuck. Now I was soaked, limping, and crying in the rain with no way to call anyone. I made it to a gas station and I stood there for a while, unsure of what to do. I hadn't memorized anyone's number and I didn't feel close enough to anyone to call them anyway. Then, a beat-up pickup truck pulled up. The passenger door opened. I couldn't see who was inside, just a deep male voice. "Come inside, I'll take you home." I froze. I'd always been told never to get in a car with a stranger, but I was desperate. I nodded and started climbing into the truck, still crying. "I promise you'll be safe." His face was completely in the shadow. I was almost all the way in, and I could hear his breath quicken. I could sense his excitement. Suddenly, I heard a woman shouting from the road. She was leaning out of the window of a small compact car. "Hey, are you okay? Come here." The urgency in her voice snapped me out of it, and I got out of the truck and I hobbled toward her. She pulled up right next to me and then told me to get in. Unlike him, I could see her face, and I trusted her immediately. She was kind, and then she asked where I lived. I told her, and then she drove me home. Before I got out, she warned me to be careful. She said that there were people out there who loved to take advantage of a girl like me, and I felt so stupid. Maybe the man in the truck would have taken me home, but deep down I knew that he wouldn't have. I could feel it. I never saw her again, but I think of her sometimes, and I hope that she's thriving. And to the man in the pickup truck, let's not meet again. Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared, because your fear feeds me.